Patrick, you said a moment ago we expect success, and Russell knows that. I'm not expecting you to sit here and say that you want him to win the league or he's out the door, but could you tell us a little bit more about that expectation?
Yeah, look, I think Russell described it himself. It's first and foremost about taking the current squad that we've got and making it better, then also adding to the squad over the summer. And, it's about competing again. So I think we all accept that last season just passed, we were way off, and that's not where we want to be. That's not acceptable as a club. So it's about competing again on all fronts, and that is the expectation.
You also talked a little bit about that investment. I wonder if you could add a little bit more about that. I know that there's only so much you can say until the general meeting on the 23rd. I think you said the majority or a sizable portion of that will be going to the footballing operations. Might there be more on top of that, or is that what Russell can expect to work with?
Yeah, so I think what I said was a decent amount, because player trading is an important part of how we grow the club. So clearly that is a good way to use an element of that investment, and that is very much part of the strategy. And in fairness, that was part of the strategy even without the investment. I think what the new ownership in this investment allows us to do is accelerate on the strategy that we were in a way going to be following.
Mark?
Kevin, you've obviously had a career that's been quite varied, but also, if you look at your time at Everton, you had to buy, you had to sell. At Ibrox, you've got a different set of circumstances. You also have the European dimension, where the club in the last 5 years has had almost a golden age of the quality that we played against and the number of games. Does that add difficulty to your role?
Yeah, I think so. It's Rangers, with respect, is a complicated problem to solve, isn't it? You've got some different strands for the different games that we're going to play. Obviously, we've got Europe, as you mentioned. We've got the Old Firm games, and then we've also got the league games. And sometimes the head coach is going to have to play differently under different circumstances. But I also think it's a really exciting challenge. This is a big club, and big clubs play in Europe. They rise to those challenges. They solve those problems. And so, from my perspective, I'm very, very excited about the opportunity of being able to solve some of those problems, and hopefully we get ourselves in a space where we win those games and get everybody excited about watching Rangers play.
Patrick, over the last few years, the club's been subsidised quite heavily by the investors, by the shareholders. In terms of the amounts of money that have come into the club from them and success in Europe, have you been able to identify a way to shift the burden from the shareholders and take advantage of those revenue streams?
Yeah, look, again, sort of going back to what is our strategy, we've since I came in, we've been looking at a strategy in which Rangers can become both successful on a sustained basis, but also on a financially sustainable basis. So we don't want to be going back to shareholders, ideally, and asking them to put their hands in their pockets. So it's up to myself and the rest of the team to be putting in place a strategy that will make sure that we're financially self-sustainable, and that does include player trading. There are also other revenue streams available. Obviously, the European revenue stream is extremely important to us, and if we can move up a league to Champions League, that's again an enhanced revenue stream, but that's all about getting it right on the pitch. And there's obviously other revenue streams that come through commercially. Again, it's a virtuous circle. If you're getting it right on the pitch, you're generating more money, and you can invest that back into football. We're looking at all different avenues for generating greater revenue, and ideally in a way that means that we're not looking to ownership going cap in hand season after season. It's going to take us a while to get there, but again, we're putting in place the building blocks, and we're just going to take the right steps in the right order.
Go Stevie, then Joshua, please.
Patrick, good afternoon. Kevin obviously spoke to you, but just to ask you, gentlemen, if you can talk us through the recruitment process of the head coach a wee bit, because there has been stories that certain people have turned down the club and jobs have been offered. Can you clarify exactly the kind of process behind it. I'm not asking you to name names or who you spoke to. I appreciate you can't do that, but there has been stories that people have turned this down. Where was Russell Martin in your thinking from the start, and why Russell Martin for you, gentlemen, that made him the outstanding candidate?
Yeah, so it has been, it's been a lengthy process, and I don't think we shy away from that. And I think to some people's frustration, it's not been more quickly. But look, as I kind of explained at the outset, the first thing that we wanted to do was make sure that we were hiring a head coach that matched the style of football we believe we need to play in order to be successful on a long-term basis. And once we'd identified that, then a lot of data analysis, and it creates long lists, and then there's a lot of video analysis to look at how coaches, coach and practice, how their teams perform. There's a lot of interviews to understand the characters of the coaches, of the various candidates. There's also a lot of references taken, so you understand how they've worked in practice, and it's not just a good interview, etc. So that is a very long process, and throughout that, I've seen names have been mentioned in the media. Some may have been involved, some may not have been involved, but we only made one offer for this role, and that was to Russell Martin, and we're delighted he accepted it.
Okay, we'll go Joshua, Michael, then Gabs, please.
Kevin, you spoke in the press release this morning about Russell having a style of play that you can see and has been developed. Can you explain a little bit as to why that's so important and maybe even takes precedence over a track record of winning trophies, this ability to develop a style of play over a period of time?
Yeah, I'll probably start by saying, first and foremost, let's be clear, we all know what the job is. The job is to win, isn't it? Clearly. And so we're committed to that, and we understand that Rangers Football Club has to appoint a head coach that helps the team to win. Of course, we think the best way of winning, certainly in this situation, in terms of SPFL and in terms of Europe, is to play in a particular way. And what we think, in terms of a style, what do we think best befits a Rangers team? It's a style that dominates all moments of the game. And my expectations is that that's what the fans would want from a Rangers team. They want us to be super aggressive when we're in possession, keep the ball, control the games more. The game should be less transitional with respect. And then out of possession, we should also be super aggressive. We should be attacking without the ball and dominating opponents, both when we've got it and when they've got it. So we were looking for an individual that would understand Rangers, understand the context of what's needed and the pressure of what's required, and then be able to deliver the style that not only best befits this football club, but also give us the best chance of winning. And through the process, that was Russell Martin.
Patrick, you'll be aware that there's been a fair bit of negativity amongst the fans, certainly online, about the appointment, and I guess you've probably picked up on that for a few days. Was that any sort of factor in your thinking that that would have to be just a storm that you would have to ride through, and has it taken a bit of kind of courage from the board almost to go down this route?
I think, firstly, we're always very sensitive and aware of supporter sentiment on any issue, and yeah, I'm aware that supporters have strong views on who the right person for the role is. So we'll always factor that into a degree, but equally, I've been talking a lot today about process and making sure we've got people and experts in that are qualified to make decisions. So we've really put our trust in a process, making sure that we've got right people in to make decisions. And so it has been following that with a lot of discipline. We're not oblivious to the noise at all, not at all. But I think we are confident that because we've conducted such a sort of a thorough process to take us to this point where we've appointed Russell, that we're confident that the supporters will get behind him, particularly when they see him in action.
Patrick, how big do you think the gap is between yourselves and Celtic, and how quickly can that gap be closed, both on the pitch in terms of success and silverware, and off the pitch as well?
From the outset of taking on this role, I've always been confident that we can close any gap that exists within Scotland, and always been confident we can do that with or without new investment and what the new investment does allow us is to accelerate on the plans, accelerate on the strategy. So I've always been confident that we can do that now that we've got new ownership in that are highly engaged, highly committed. We're bringing in new management. We've got Kevin on Monday, Russell today. I think we're in a really, really good position. So of course I'm confident, and yeah, very confident about that.
Rahman and then David to finish, please.
Patrick, could you tell us how heavily involved Andrew Kavanagh and Parag Marathi were in the recruitment process? And a kind of follow-up to that, how significant a period do you think this is for the club with the new ownership, a new head coach?
So Andrew and Parag, we've been in really constructive discussions with, for several weeks, and pre-ownership. Naturally, we wanted to make sure that decisions we were making pre-change of ownership would have longevity after the change of ownership. So we've been in really constructive discussions. Both have been incredibly supportive and highly engaged throughout the process and involved in the process. It's very much a club decision. But of course, Kevin and myself have been driving it, but it's absolutely been done in sync with Andrew and Parag. I think so. The second part of your question,
just in terms of how significant a period do you think this is for the club with the new ownership? Head coach has just been appointed.
And I think it clearly is incredibly significant. That's 2 seismic changes. In fact, 3. If you look at, we've had a change of ownership, followed by a sporting director coming in, followed by a head coach being announced. I mean, that's an awful lot of activity for one club in 1 week. So I think it does herald a really, positive new chapter for the club. So yeah, I think it is a seismic period for the club and sets a really strong foundation for the future.
You mentioned
last one, Rahman,
sure.
And then David, please.
Sure. You mentioned Europe earlier in the Champions League. Is qualifying to the Champions League in season 1 for Russell Martin a hope or an expectation?
Look, I think for Rangers, qualifying for the Champions League is always something that we would aspire to, always. Now, we've got 3 qualification matches to go through, so that is tough for any club. We know that. So we're realistic about what's possible. Of course, with a good run, Champions League is possible, but equally, we've been playing in the Europa League successfully, and both competitions are strong competitions which we would be excited to be in.
Last one, David, please.
This to Kevin. Kevin, the squad that has been assembled at Ibrox as it currently stands has always seemed to be a bit misshapen, that there was no overall plan to it, that it was mainly sign a good player and a good player will do well. Is there a more overarching view now of recruitment going forward, and if you like, maybe more of a process as to how people fit rather than the individual profile?
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to comment on what went before. All I can really talk about is what we're going to do next. And I think where we are, clearly, with Russell, is with a head coach that's got a very clear identity. I think that's a really positive thing, because if you don't know where you're going, you often end up where you don't want to be, don't you? And that's possibly where lots of football clubs go wrong. So our perspective is be very clear on what direction of travel looks like, be very clear on what profiles we need to be able to be successful in that identity, and then work together to identify the very best players, the very best talent to come into that group to help us to win. And so that's certainly how we're going to operate going forwards.